Besant called Death and After. Annie Besant, especially if some of my friends in India don't realize how absolutely remarkable woman she was. And the whole Indian National Congress was actually started on the grounds of the Theosophical Society. And people don't realize that she was the president of the Indian National Congress before Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi took her position from her later on. So she was, and then she had been married to a minister in England, got divorced, goes to India, learned Sanskrit, translated many of the books from Sanskrit into English. Just I'm reminding you, quite a remarkable woman. Actually, her translation of the Bhagavad Gita, I actually often quote from that or even use some her own translation. And she was the first person to give one of the standard colleges when the so-called Hindu university was started in Banaras, Banaras Hindu University. It was Annie Besant who gave the first college to that university. So I often remind my Indian friends that here is a, but I have often wondered, is there a film about her? About Annie Besant?
Not yet. I tried in Hollywood. No one knew who she was.
See, this is the tragedy. Even in India, often most of my friends don't know who she was.
Yeah.
There is even a town based after her name in India, or a street is based after named, but somehow people don't seem to know. In any case, the fourth book there is not available yet here in the bookstore. It's called Blessed by Mysterious Grace, written by me. I had actually titled it Blessed by Undeserved Grace because I am absolutely amazed at the very mysterious forces that have struck me in my life. And for example, when I first met Krishnamurti, I had no idea who he was. I mentioned this as an example only. And then a well-known Zen master in South Korea insisting on giving me lots of money and an image of the Buddha from the 10th century, which cost about $15,000, because I had done something for him in a previous life. Now, what the hell had I done for him in a previous life? I have no idea. So I asked him, what was I in a previous life? He said, he first of all started laughing. Then he said, you were a monk. So I said, then what happened? Then he laughed even more. Maybe you ran into a beautiful girl. There. But the reason I am mentioning this, because I invite all of you to think the mysterious forces running your own life. Why should you be born in USA rather than in China or Canada? Are you deciding this? Am I deciding this? When we realized, sadly, actually recently a very well-known Nobel Prize winner in science said, more we know about the universe, more we realize that it's completely pointless. Whereas from all spiritual teachings, strong emphasis that there is a purpose not only to the human beings, each person, but also to the whole creation. So it's a very different attitude coming from the scientific side. I very much invite you to really consider what are the mysterious forces in your own life which have been running you. That's more or less the purpose of this book here. In any case, I just wanted to draw your attention to particularly Annie Besant's book. She's absolutely a remarkable person from my judgment, anyway. Okay, so now we will.
Hi, we're ready to record?
Sorry, I have to move again. I'm in the way of the camera.
No, no.
Just need to move over just a little bit. Just trouble change. Yeah, that's perfect.
Ready? Ready to record.
In the great epic in India called Mahabharata, by the way, I should tell you here something. A Dutch translator trying to translate the Mahabharata said, Mahabharata is not a book, it's a library. It's a very large text. I simply remind you of this. So, Yaksha, difficult to translate this, but a celestial spirit, asks this. Prashna means question. So this is called in India Yaksha Prashna, question raised by this celestial spirit. What is the greatest mystery in the world? And the only answer which he accepts is human beings see people all around them dying, but no one believes that I too will die. When was the last time you thought that you were going to die? For this particular person of celestial spirit, Yaksha, that is the greatest mystery in the world. And here I can even tell you my own personal experience, which I can hardly believe it to be so. My older brother was also living in Canada at that time. Sadly, at the age of 56, he passed away. So I was invited to come, naturally, to his funeral. And this is a custom in the Hindu tradition that the nearest, oldest male will start the fire for cremation. So I actually lit the fire for his cremation. And I remember saying to myself, I can never forget about death. But in honesty, I have to say, hardly one day later, I no longer remember this. I mean, I could remember my brother's death, but I could not recall that I too will be cremated. So this question is actually very important, and it was particularly in Christian and Buddhist monasteries more than elsewhere. Whenever a monk met another monk, they would say, memento mori, remember death. Because it's always a very great emphasis if I realize that whatever I call Ravi is actually transient. On the other hand, every religion, as far as I am aware of, by the way, feel absolutely free to correct me if I'm making some mistakes or if I don't know something or the other. I'm happy. I'm not committed to dying with my errors with me. But my impression is that every religion in one way or the other conveys that the death of the body is not the death of the person. Always the implication is that the person is not the body. And especially, I think I mentioned this quickly last time as well, in all the Indian languages that I can determine, the expression that is used when a person dies is sharir tyag. He has left the body. Although, ironically, in English we say he has given up the ghost. Nevertheless, the suggestion in any case, whatever language may be used at a popular level, that the death of the body is not the death of the person. And I tried to speak about this a little bit yesterday. Constant reminder, especially from the spiritual direction, that whatever I am now attached to, my body, my mind, and its desires and its fears, that is transient, and that the call is to connect with that element in me which is coming from the spiritual side. I tried to say this yesterday also. That side coming from the spiritual side that gets called soul, sometimes mixed up with the word spirit. These two are completely different expressions. Soul is personal. Your soul is different from my soul. Spirit is transpersonal. And the purpose from the perspective of the spiritual teachings, why this soul has taken on the body, is not that the body has taken on the soul. One needs to be very clear about this. That the soul has taken on the body so that this body, including the mind, I'm just using the word body, so that this body can undertake appropriate actions in order to enhance the quality of the soul, so that it from personal quality, it can gradually evolve to something transpersonal. Spirit is transpersonal. So this is, again, simply let me remind you, it's the soul that has taken on my body, and the suggestion from the spiritual teachings is that when this body dies, soul does not die. But the reason why it has taken on this body, so that I can undertake appropriate actions, to assist the evolution of this soul spiritually. And some of these things I had mentioned yesterday also, but just quickly to go over, there are 2 trillion or even more galaxies, and we are in a very average galaxy. Remember, I did not create myself. I did not create the apparatus that breathes, nor the air that it breathes to stay alive. Simply to remind you, we don't need any fancy data about this. There are more than 8 billion people on the planet. Average lifespan is about 77. So what does this mean? In 100 years, 8 billion people will die. I simplify it by saying 100 million people will die each year. It's actually more than that if you just calculate it. Each year. And as many or more are born. It's like we are on a large conveyor belt. Remembering Mother Earth has a very fecund womb and a very destructive jaw, constantly working. And again, it is easy to imagine that each one of us thinks we are very special, but out of 8 billion people, how many do you think are actually searching for anything? Don't need to become self-important about it, but impartially to look. In fact, in the Upanishads, there is a general strong emphasis that awakening to the reality is not according to the general universal law. In fact, if anybody wishes to awaken, tries to awaken, then the appropriate forces, Indra in this case, who is said to be the lord of the devas, would maybe send a prostitute or send somebody or the other. Urvashi is a very famous one who was sent by him, in order to make sure that he doesn't awaken. Awakening is contrary to the universal law. It is against the universal ordinary law. That is very much the implication, at least in the Upanishads. So, therefore, if anybody wishes to awaken spiritually, which we on the other hand would say is the purpose of somebody becoming a theosophist or somebody following a serious teaching, it all sounds very nice, but it is contrary to the overall universal law. Therefore, it requires a much stronger search, much stronger struggle. Remembering that I hear. Is there a purpose to my existence? I said just a few minutes earlier, more and more, a very well-known quantum mechanics Nobel Prize winner actually recently wrote an article saying the more we know about the universe, more we realize how pointless the whole thing is. This is their conclusion. Whereas from the spiritual side, whether I am aware of the purpose of my existence or not, but there is a strong emphasis that my existence has a purpose. And that is really what I need to be searching for, and I need to be acting corresponding to that purpose. Very strong emphasis. Always remembering that I obviously did not create myself. I mentioned this yesterday also. We keep saying, I am breathing. Did I create this breathing apparatus? Can you even create your nails yourself? I'll be surprised if you have even that much knowledge. Sometimes our doctors spend thousands of years trying to figure out how the lung works, how this works, that works, and even after all that, each time they are surprised by something new coming up. So to imagine that I created myself is absolute fantasy. And so very strong suggestion, and I think I had quoted this yesterday, I may have it here again. Yeah, first of all, from the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, an eternal portion of myself becomes the jiva. Jiva is the Sanskrit word living creature. Sometimes I use Sanskrit expressions because no one word translation is really ever quite appropriate. But on the other hand, especially now English has become the planetary language, we all have to use this again and again. And then he says the jiva and works upon the five senses as well as the sixth one, the manas. I mentioned this yesterday very quickly. Manas is the usual ordinary mind, which according to most of the teachers essentially more or less serves what the body wishes or fears. Therefore, the call to connect with a mind subtler or higher than the ordinary mind. Krishnamurti may well call it intelligence beyond thought. In the Bhagavad Gita, the expression really is to relate with buddhi. In fact, the main yoga that Krishna teaches is buddhi yoga. I have never heard any yoga teacher even know that there is something called buddhi yoga. That's the main yoga he teaches. But this is again and again a call to move from manas to buddhi. We had a similar thing in Greek language, dianoia, which is ordinary mind, to nous, which is, if you like, superior mind. And the reason for that connection is that buddhi, unlike manas, has both a psychological aspect, because it is your buddhi is different from my buddhi, but it has an awareness of cosmological aspects. It's a little bit like if you are driving on a road, suddenly you see a nice viewpoint, especially here in Ohio often. You stop your car, you can see the snow on the mountains on the other side, but you're still on this side. So buddhi has the ability to be aware of what is on the other side, and therefore be able to try to correspond to the demand from the other side, higher side, spiritual side, if you like, and then be able to even control manas, ordinary mind, and then discipline the body to correspond to that. Otherwise, the senses are controlling manas, and manas occasionally tries even to control whatever we may understand by buddhi. And Krishna has a very strong expression, buddhi nashat pranashyati. If buddhi gets disturbed or killed, then there is complete destruction. This is the expression in the Bhagavad Gita. But similarly, again I had mentioned this yesterday, in the book of Genesis, the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Think about this for a few moments. As long as I am alive or you are alive, it's the breath of God that is keeping us alive, not my breath. And when that breath leaves, so-called Ravi dies. Sometimes just the language becomes more or less a way of controlling our mind, and we forget some of the basic ideas behind this. So therefore, I keep reminding you again and again. When I say that I was born on such a date, what am I referring to as I? Is I the element of divinity or the breath of God in my body? Or is I the body? The body of what is called Ravi will die. Is that the end of Ravi? how can all religious teachings get away by saying that that is not the end of Ravi? What do we actually understand by this? It's easy to say that the death of the body is not the death of the person, but have I any idea what this other thing is? I keep hoping, and I am also praying really, that some of you would actually be searchers, not simply believing what the Buddha said or Christ said or Krishna said. In any case, whatever Ravi says, that is completely transient. No, what is much more important is, how does this apply to you? This is my general suggestion. Whenever you read any of the great sages, something strikes us, or maybe even we grew up in a particular place and we think Christ is the Son of God, so we should listen to him, fine. Or that Krishna is God incarnate, we should listen to him. Okay, so whatever calls us, no need to dismiss this, but then to really ask yourself, how does it apply to me, what he's saying? For example, if Christ says, I had quoted this yesterday, probably I will have it again here, unless you leave yourself behind, you cannot be a follower of mine. Am I leaving myself behind? How do I do it? What is this self is asking me to leave behind? So I really invite you, I hope you will be searchers rather than just quoting this, believing this. Even I can keep quoting all this. That is not what makes anything sensible from any human perspective. Okay, so let's continue here. One of the assertions common to all religions today, I just mentioned that death of the body is not the death of the person. If we are inclined to accept this, then what in me will die and what will not die when my body dies? How do I find this? How do I relate with this? According to all the great spiritual teachers, such as Krishna, Buddha, Christ, there is a purpose to the whole universe and to the existence of each creature. However, they all say that the purpose cannot be intellectually understood, but can be felt in moments of great silence and stillness, which is why practically the first substantial sutra in the Yoga Sutra is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is stopping all the movements of the mind. Mind, actually even in the theosophical literature, mind is the slayer of the truth. Very strong emphasis. I'm not sure I necessarily accept the next sentence, slay the slayer. That's not my remark, this is in the theosophical literature. Mind is the slayer of the truth, slay the slayer. I don't think we need to slay the mind, but to find its appropriate place. I will come back to this later on. But very strong suggestion in all serious teachings that there are levels of reality subtler than the mind. In fact, I increasingly feel that is the very meaning of the word spiritual. If something is spiritual, it is almost of necessity subtler than the mind. It cannot be grasped by the mind, cannot be described by the mind. Even the Buddha could not describe what nirvana is. Christ could not describe what the kingdom of God is. Always this strong emphasis that it cannot be described by the mind or cannot be approached by the mind. And here I thought it will be interesting for you to read a well-known scientist, Blaise Pascal, says, heart has reasons that reason does not know. The last function of reason is to recognize there are an infinity of things which surpass it. Every searcher can speak from their own experience, but certainly when we think of great sages who have been great searchers, it's the feeling or something quietly resonating in the heart is the first avenue to truth. In fact, ironically, you will find exactly the same kind of emphasis by all the great poets, great scientists. Whenever they have bothered to write about anything, they don't always say how they came to this idea. But for example, Newton or Einstein, when they have described it, they usually call it they had an intuition. That's another form of feeling. So one has feeling first of all, and then of course from a scientific point of view, it needs to be then expressed in a way that it can be verified by external measurements, etc. So then the mind is required. Nobody is therefore needs to be against the mind. But the first avenue to truth is the heart or the feeling. Sometimes it's not at all clear what I have heard, but something has touched me, something feels very strongly. And so one keeps returning to that. Now, this is another sort of general remark I am making. The general way the purpose or the deep impulse in all levels of reality gets expressed in spiritual teachings is that each level of existence is trying to evolve, as it were to return home to the highest level, called God or Brahma or Absolute or many other names. So don't get stuck with any other names. Then I quoted to you a remark of my own teacher, Jean de Salzman. There is an energy which is trying to evolve. That is why it comes into a body. If a person works and helps the evolution of this energy, at death this energy goes to a higher level. If one does not work, the energy returns to its own level, but the human life is wasted. If you carefully read the book Death and After by Annie Besant, you would, of course, different language, subtle body, etc., different expressions are used, but you'll find much of the same kind of emphasis there. But the body is necessary. My body is needed to assist the evolution of the particle of divinity called my soul that has taken on my body for its purpose. Which is another thing. Specifically goes out of his way. If you're interested, in the 17th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, he says those who undertake severe ascetic practices torment not only themselves, they torment me who is seated in their body. This is Krishna saying, they torment me who is seated in their body. So there is no recommendation about all this fantastic, very ascetic practices here. The body and the mind needs to be, it's the instrument to assist the evolution of the spirit. Therefore, the evolution needs to be well preserved, sharpened, kept well, so that it can assist properly. Spirit of the body is lame, but to use slightly different expression used by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, Purusha, which will be another way of saying God, cannot act without Prakriti. Prakriti would be like saying nature, but the whole material side. So the spiritual side, in order for it to act, requires the appropriate instrument, and therefore there is certainly absolutely no suggestion to be against the body or the mind. Which is why in the Yoga Sutras, for example, asana is one of the 8 limbs of yoga, to keep well, so the body is well. On the other hand, I think I quickly mentioned this yesterday, if you force the body to do something completely extraordinary, it doesn't help the health of the body. If you look at anybody who won some races or the other somewhere, hardly any of them ever live past the age of 60. Simply because they are really torturing their body to do something or the other. Don't take my word for it, just you can check. Google is present God, he can tell you everything. So, as I said this yesterday also quickly, I'm saying here, in each one of us there are two sides. One coming from the spirit side. Of course, different labels get attached to it, capital S self, or small s self, or ego, or flesh, or body, or mind. And their main features I mention here. I, or the capital S self, if you like, has to do with meaning, search for truth, love, beauty, expressed in compassion, awareness, and sense of service, sense of unity. Impartially ask yourself, in the last 1 week, how many seconds were you connected with that self? It's not a question of winning or losing, it's a question of just honestly facing the way I am, and then to see what I need to undertake to contribute to whatever the spiritual teachers are asking us to try to do. Then me has to do with fear, desire, gain, loss, survival, continuity, reward, punishment, exclusivity, approval, disapproval, knowledge, ignorance. Naturally concerned, is my talk good? Would people like it? Would they? There is absolutely no reason to be against it, but more importantly, the call really is how to find the appropriate relationship between I and me. One of the tragedies in many of the religious teachings is as if you can just forget about the world. This is silly. There is no suggestion in any serious teaching. Christ, for example, said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. But also reminded, my kingdom is not of this world. There is no reason to be against the body or against the mind or against doing something in the world or even gaining something, becoming important or becoming rich. But what is it serving in you? As I just said, the idea of the two natures is quite a universal idea. Here I give many sources. Spiritual and carnal is the way St. Paul calls it. Angelic and animal is the way Jean de Salzman calls it. Higher and lower nature is what Plotinus calls. Krishna has a very strong remark, divine nature and demonic nature. This is what he calls it. Sometimes simply I and me, or self and ego. And then this remark of Plotinus that even though the purpose of using this body-mind to assist its evolution, but it gets occupied just with the body-mind and can therefore sink completely into matter. As he says, it's amphibious in nature. It can sink completely into matter, or it can soar into the one. That is the call, to soar into the one. Just again and again a reminder, it is the soul or the spirit that has a body, not the other way around. The soul needs a body to undertake some actions. Thus the body-mind is intended to be a tool or an instrument of the spirit. A remark of my teacher, body is necessary, but it is not the most important thing. It is designed for destruction. Who could disagree with this? In fact, I was saying this yesterday also. Let me say that almost everything I say or I quote from the other sages is just common sense. I don't know why it needs to be said, but it needs to be said again and again, because the common sense is constantly forgotten. Then John the Salesman uses the word energy. We could certainly call it spiritual energy or the spirit. Energies of different qualities have different durations. The energy of a higher level does not die at the death of a lower level. At the death of the body, not all the energies in the body die. These higher energies are in the body, but they are not of the body. The body is not the most important thing. The important thing is the real I, which is independent of the physical body. But the body is very necessary because the higher energy needs the body in order to manifest itself. The body is needed so that I can have an action. Most of these remarks that I'm quoting from Madame de Salzmann are actually in my book called Heart Without Measure. Personally, from my own experience, after her death, I decided to gather some of her remarks and teaching. I could not think of any other title except that she had a heart without measure. So that's the title of that book. At least in my own experience, which of course doesn't mean everybody else's experience, she was the most exalted, amazing combination of love and wisdom that she brought. Socrates is about to die as he has been condemned to drink hemlock. This often happens with all the good people. Society is not eager to keep them around. They find some way of getting rid of them. One of his pupils asked him, "In what way shall we bury you?" Socrates said, "In any way that you like, but you must get hold of me and take care that I do not run away from you." This is in the last dialogue of Plato, by the way. Phaedo is called Phaedo. The dialogue is called Phaedo. Is Socrates the body of Socrates? Is Socrates the spirit? In Greek, the expression is daemon, D-A-M-O-N. Who is Socrates? Who are you? Or who am I? That is the question again and again to be brought. So, come back to this remark of Socrates. You can bury me wherever you like if you can find me. That's the simplest way of saying this. It is important to emphasize that being born of the spirit does not mean to ignore the body or the ordinary ego or the manifested world. The body is needed, the ego is needed, but in its right place. So this remark of my teacher, I come back to this practically every day as a reminder. Ego is a good servant, but a bad master. Who needs a servant who just wants to lie around doing nothing? But if the servant begins to make all the decisions in the household, that's when the problem begins. So the kind of remarks which are often made, dying to this worldly self or being free of it, actually means to die to self-importance, to egotistic craving and fear, to self-will, and to all the habits that bind us like vast serpents to the very self from which we need to be free. Here maybe I even give you another personal example. I'm sure most know the name of Samdhong Rinpoche. He was the Prime Minister of the Tibetan government in exile for 8 years. But this event that took place was just before that, and he was at that time the head of the Institute, Sarnath Institute for Buddhist Studies. He was president of that. He and I were invited by the Theosophical Society. As you know, every 6 or 7 years has an international gathering somewhere or the other. Next year they're having it in British Columbia. But this is 2001. They were having this gathering in Sydney, Australia. It is completely ironic. It takes me 2 days to get there, 2 days to get back. I was invited to speak for 1 hour. But that's life. So he and I were invited as the two main speakers. This is 2001, a long time ago. And after our public talks, they invited us to have just a conversation with each other in public. And as has become almost a cliche actually in practically every religion, somehow that one needs to get rid of the ego. So Samdhong Rinpoche said something like that. And I said, Rinpoche, if I had not done a PhD in physics and had not written some books, do you think they will invite me here? And could I have done all this without the ego? And that if you were not the head of the Sarnath Institute, do you think they will invite you here? Why be against the ego? Stunned silence, as you can imagine. In fact, 1 or 2 people thought I was being rude to him. We actually became very good friends afterwards. In fact, a few years later, in fact, Rick Sharp is here, maybe he would even remember it. I was at the TS in Adyar, and suddenly somebody knocks at my door. And it happened to be Samdhong Rinpoche. He said, I just found out that you were here, I wanted to come and see you. So I invited him, then I invited some of my friends, and Rick was there, and Priscilla, you were there too, just so that they can come and meet him, because I asked him to teach us to lead a little meditation, because he's very well known for meditation. So the reason I'm mentioning all this, that to actually face the issue, to be against the ego, in my judgment, is completely absurd. Nothing can be done in our life without the ego. Ego is century, somehow ego has been associated with completely the lowest level of something like egotism or egoism. Ego simply means, the word comes from Latin and Greek. Ego simply means self. For example, all the great remarks of Christ, such as I am the way, the truth, and the life, they all begin with the word ego eimi. So somehow the word ego has been reduced to completely lowest level of something or the other. It simply means the self, ordinary self. And why be against it? Without it, nothing is done. But then the question is, as my teacher said, ego is a good servant, but a bad master. If it completely takes over, then I forget about the purpose of existence is not being driven by my ego, it is being driven, or is called in any case, whether I'm listening to it or not, by the spiritual element that has taken on my body. So, to allow to find one's true identity and to see who can be the real master in me, and to then ask the ego to be the appropriate servant. Closer and closer to discussing death. This is William Butler Yeats, well-known poet. Nor dread nor hope attend a dying animal. A man awaits his end, dreading and hoping all. This is, so reward and punishment becomes a driving thing in us, and religions take advantage of that. They will sell you something. Oh, you can go to heaven if you give more money to the church, or you'll go to hell if you do this and that. So that becomes a, a useful principle for them. Interesting remark of Mark Twain. I'm bringing some of these for us to really think. The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time. I do not fear death. I had been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born, and had not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it. Who could disagree with this? This is the remark of Socrates, again in the same book, Phaedo by Plato. The fear of death, my friends, to fear death, my friends, is only to think ourselves wise, without being wise, for it is to think that we know what we do not know. Background of that is that some of his friends or pupils are sitting close to him. He has just been forced to drink hemlock. He's going to die. And so he says to them, you're behaving as if you know what happens after death. And that furthermore, as if you know that what happens after death is worse than what happens before death. And then personally for me, actually, one of the most important remarks in the whole of philosophy is a remark of Socrates. Since I do not know, therefore I am free. That is Socrates' remark. Since I do not know, therefore I am free. Constant reminder, actually, by all the great sages, however much we know, in fact, any of the greats, for example, Einstein or Newton actually explicitly say, the more we get to know, the more we realize how little we know. Maybe I'll quote to you a remark of Newton. Newton and Einstein are perhaps the two of the greatest scientists in history of humanity. This is a remark of Newton. I do not know what the future people might say, but as far as I am concerned, I am like a little child at the seashore, finding one pretty pebble or another while the whole ocean of truth lies undiscovered before me. This is Isaac Newton. More one knows, one then realizes how little one knows. Oh, here actually I forgot on that. I quoted here, yes. This is Socrates' remark. He says to his pupil, you are behaving as if you know what happens after death. Furthermore, as if you know what happens after death is worse than what happens before death. As for myself, since I do not know, therefore I am free. In fact, I remember an exchange with Krishnamurti, and somehow it gets said that people are known. And I personally have never heard him use that rather strong language. Damn it, sir, if it is the trouble is the attachment to the known. It's not the fear of the unknown, it's the attachment to the known, which is why one of his books' title is Freedom from the Known. Some of you probably know that. What most of us wish to extend in time is what we know. So we want everlasting life. What the sages call our attention to is eternal life, which is free of death and birth, free of time, but not against time. The everlasting is not necessarily eternal. I invite you, in fact, even many of the biblical translations after the approximately 1930, earlier they would have used the word everlasting. It has now been changed to eternal. These two words have completely different meaning. Everlasting is meaning continuity in time. Eternal has nothing against time, but it is free of time. Very simple, don't take it too literally. Love and marriage. Marriage has a continuity in time. Love has no continuity in marriage or in time. It can be before marriage, it can be after marriage, it can be outside marriage or inside marriage. It is not against time, but it is not a continuity in time. Even the greatest sages could not always be oozing out love everlastingly. No, it's important to realize that eternal wisdom can appear at any time, but it is not stuck in time. Which is also, just to give you an example, when the Buddha became enlightened, it is said that he became nirkala, which is to say beyond time, but also trikaldarshi, seer of three times, past, present and future. So to be free of time doesn't mean to be against time, but not to be stuck in time. In fact, I have a whole article on this in my book, The Spiritual Roots of Yoga. If you're into, it's also on my website. You don't need to buy the book. Just an article there. Then very strong suggestion from this is in the oldest Upanishad. Some of you, especially anybody from India, would probably know this in Sanskrit. Asato ma sadgame, tamaso ma jyotirgame, mrityorma amritam game. From the unreal lead me to the real, from darkness lead me to light, from death. Often the English translation is from death lead me to immortality. That is a wrong expression, because that is continuation in time. This is why I am partly drawing your attention to this. The state of eternal life, of being freed from the cycle of birth and death, is certainly not a continuation of personal identity in time, everlastingly. The state is rather one of freedom from the limiting self, and therefore from fear and ambition, which are the marks and supports of the ego, as well as from the limitations of time. Aim of spiritual practice is not freedom for myself, rather it is freedom from myself. Only those can come to eternal life who do not bring themselves, who have died to themselves. No one who is anyone is fit to be one with God. Here I give you maybe some references. By the way, most of my Christian friends don't even know this book, Theologia Germanica. According to Martin Luther, there are only 3 books that a Christian needs to read. Letter to the Romans, Theologia Germanica, and the Gospel of John. This is Martin Luther, not me. But most of my Christian friends don't even know that there is a book called Theologia Germanica. But this is one of the remarks there. Nothing burns in hell except self-will. Ansari of Herat was a great Sufi sage several centuries back. Know that when you learn to lose yourself, you will reach the beloved. There is no other secret to be learned and more than this is not known to me. Christ in Matthew, unless you leave yourself behind, you cannot be a follower of mine. But one of the things that I want to keep reminding you again and again, I earlier said that already, to leave oneself behind does not mean to be against oneself. It is really to find its appropriate place. To leave one's ego behind, etc., is not to be against the ego. In fact, I often remind people, if you people had enough time available, had enough money, you could not even be here. So why be against having money or against having time? How do you have it without having something in your ego actually working? So I'm saying, as I keep saying, everything I say is completely obvious if only you would pay attention to it. It doesn't really need to be said, but it probably needs to be said again and again. Therefore, more and more freedom from me. Here is a remark of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Steadfast in yoga, the knower of truth realizes, truly I do nothing at all. That something is being done through him, through the yogi, becoming an instrument of Krishna's will rather than his own will, his own achievement, his own decision. And then here is a remark of Christ. When you lift up the Son of Man, you will come to realize I am. By the way, just to remind you, I am is the English translation of Yahweh. Even the Torah was read in Israel for at least a century in Greek. And it was there, Yahweh was translated as ego eimi, I am. When you lift up the Son of Man, you will come to realize I am, and that I do nothing by myself. See, he's a great yogi. As he says, yogi realizes that he does nothing. I say only what the Father has taught me. I'm not myself the source of the words I speak. It is the Father who dwells in me, doing his own work. There's an old Sufi saying, if you die before you die, you will not die when you die. I was pleasantly surprised to actually discover this also on Mount Athos, in one of the monasteries. I think I mentioned St. Paul's Monastery. Have any of you been to Mount Athos here? You guys are just good Christians in your own manner. St. Paul said, I die daily. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. The greatest fear, in my understanding, of the sages is that of dying without having died to their ego selves. Without this death, they would be condemned to the prison of their own egos. The sage strives for a discontinuity of the ego self in time and not for its everlasting perpetuation. Very different sorts of questions about life after death arise for those who wish to be free of their own self-will than for those who fear the extinction of their egos. Everybody these days wants to live longer and longer. Scientists are trying to work very hard to find some chemicals that can keep your body, revive it again. so that you can continue the way you are. The sage fears dying without the extension of the ego, without having entered into the state of eternal life of nirvana. Nirvana literally also emptiness, complete freedom. Rumi, great Sufi sage, our death is our wedding with eternity. What is the secret? God is one. Now, I suggest this just simply, it will assist you then to a little bit more reflect on the kinds of things I've been saying. It might assist you more. Write in your own journal about what do I expect will happen to me after my body dies. And what do I hope will happen? And how does my attitude affect my life now? Yesterday somebody was asking me when I showed that many differences in the two traditions, that was in this book, Whispers from the Other Shore. Okay, I think now we can have, what, a 15 minutes break? Then you can all try to reform me afterwards.